Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is our second session on the topic of our outlook in life. And we tend to think of that in very conceptual terms, my outlook as a Catholic or as a Buddhist or as a communist or whatever. And that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about a sort of a background logic, okay, or a background paradigm, if you like the word, for how we look at life and how we are. So within that context, there are many ways of being, and the two fundamental ways of being that concern us are, well, they have a lot to do with the subject of hope, which we covered a couple of weeks ago. Because hope is pulling us forward, or promises to pull us forward. And the opposite of that, of moving forward, is being stuck. And a word which has been used a lot recently for that stuckness is rumination, and it's very apt. Most of the time it does have to do with rumination. So let's take a quick look at that. First of all, there's two aspects. Rumination is not necessarily bad. To ruminate just means literally a ruminant is a class of animals like cows who chew the cud. Okay, so they walk around and they take the grass and they put it in one stomach, but they don't digest it. They just absorb. They're just taking it in. They go sit down and they ruminate. That's when they actually digest the grass. Okay, so that rumination, as a metaphor, I see myself sort of sitting in the field and stroking my chin and chewing the cud and sort of figuring out my life. And sometimes it can be quite useful. I mean, this is all about questioning yourself, questioning your motives, where you're coming from, where you're going. But of course, rumination is about too much questioning. And most importantly, it's about repeated patterns of rumination. So we're always doing it, patterns that we fall into. I found a very interesting snippet of psychological information today, which is that I'm going to read it. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. A Russian psychologist called Zeigarnik. Individuals are more likely to remember information from unfinished business than from finished tasks. Okay, so when things are left undone, or when we feel that things are left undone, when things are hanging in our head, we're more likely to go back to them, which means that they're going to be hanging again, which is going to make us more and more. So that's where this whole, we talk about the monkey mind and the busyness, and that's one of the engines, and that's very interesting. I'm going to be thinking about this more because I haven't really heard of this before. Not that it doesn't make sense, it makes complete sense. So let me tell you a little story. I grew up with my brother and my two sisters. My brother went and, when he was 17 years old, he went and took his driving test. He passed and he was allowed to use the car. When I was 17, I went and took my driving test and I passed, and I was not allowed to use the car. I was not allowed to use the car for many years. And I was not allowed to do a lot of things for many years. And I didn't understand it at all at the time. Now I realized that I was much more troubled and angry and volatile than I understood at the time. And I understand, I suppose, my parents' motive, partly. But because I was treated that way, I developed a resentment about that. And I kept playing it over in my mind, and I couldn't figure it. And every time I played it over in my mind, and it wasn't just about that one event, it's lots of events like that, I gradually acquired this attitude of not really trusting them and not expecting to be trusted. And the more I expected not to be trusted, then the more erratic my behavior grew. And then the more condemnation I got from them. So you get the vicious cycle. Okay, it's I know it sounds terrible, but it's actually a normal, typical family game. This is the way that families grow. I just happened to be in that position at that time. So what happened is, so I laid a little, that whole event, or that series of events, that created not just like an event which affected me, but a whole ethos, a whole way of approaching the world, an outlook, okay, in which rumination played a huge part. And the thing about rumination in this case is that I just kept going over the cycle. I kept triggering more cycles. I kept getting more feedback, and I kept, my reality kept getting reinvented, re-authenticated, and I felt more and more and more trapped. In fact, I didn't actually feel trapped. I just felt that this was what normal was, that there was no question of getting out of it. So that's the worst sort of trap you can be in, you know, when you don't even know that there's actually a way out. So that sort of rumination, it just goes on and on the same cycle. And it happens a lot with family. It happens a lot with enmities. And sometimes it's happened to me, sometimes just with memories, when I go over an event again and again and again and again. And each time I work myself up, and yet there's a certain sort of comfort to it. There's a sort of this, I know in this place, I know I'm right. Maybe that's the comfort. It's that sense of protecting yourself and being secure in your little opinion. But you're stuck in a cycle of thought. And in order to break out of that cycle of thought, normally you need to do something like make an apology, or make an admission, or be honest in the way you haven't been, or somehow break out of it. And it takes a special effort. Maybe sometimes a special friend who can perhaps break into you. But to see yourself in those cycles when they're so deeply buried can be very difficult. The key is to recognize that particular sort of comfort / discomfort, you know, of being in that familiar place where I know what I'm doing and I'm right, and I'm holding my resentment and I'm going over it again and again. There's a feeling to that which is quite unique. It's troubling and yet it's familiar. It's comforting and yet it's not. It hurts. So that's the feeling we want to become familiar with. You want to recognize that when it comes up, and then you can say, okay, ruminating. I'm going over this again. And you look at the cycle. And of course, now it's up there. You're conscious about it. So now the attention that you bring to that rumination is completely different, has a totally different effect, which is to see the illogic in what you're doing and the painfulness of what you're doing, and to show you that there are other ways open to you, that you can let go. As soon as you see this, you can let go of it, but you have to see it. That's the tricky part. Rumination is not subtle, and yet it can be very hard to see, because when you're in it, you're so in it that you don't really want to label it. You don't really want to call it that. You don't really want to pull yourself out of it. It's tricky. But there is this basic choice, you know, either we move forward with our lives, we pursue our hopes in a rational and an objective and a workable way, or we get stuck. And stuck usually involves some sort of recrimination, some sort of playing out a poor me, or I'm not good enough, or I should be better, or others should be treating me better, but some sort of basically an argument about the way life actually is. It's a refusal of the way things are. That's when you get stuck. So this is the basic choice. You get stuck or you move forward. And mindfulness is what moves you forward.